The cold was a constant thief. It stole the feeling from her fingers as she scrubbed the flagstones, stole the breath from her lungs in the high corridors of the Skyfang citadel, and stole the hope from her heart, bit by bit, with every passing winter. Lark had been born in the shadow of this mountain fortress, and she felt as though its frost had seeped into her very bones. She was a servant, a ghost in gray wool, notable only for her silence and the efficiency of her work. To be notable for anything else was to be dangerous. Her hands were raw in the icy water of the bucket, the lye soap biting into the cracks in her skin. Around her, the great hall buzzed with the nervous energy of a royal summons. Every member of the court, from the highest lord to the lowest stable hand, had been called to assemble. Rumors flew like ravens in a storm. The king was naming an heir. The king was declaring war. The king was dying. Lark kept her head down, her world reduced to the swirling gray slurry on the floor. The last rumor felt the truest. She had seen King Theron from a distance, a figure of remote power and chilling stillness. But lately, the stillness seemed less like control, and more like fragility. The air around him, once crackling with the energy of an apex predator, now felt thin and brittle. His wolf, they whispered, was silent. A king without his wolf was just a man, and a man could not hold the northern throne. A boot stepped deliberately into the puddle of dirty water she was about to wipe away. Polished black leather, impossibly fine. Lark's gaze traveled up, past the silver-gray trousers, to the severe face of Lord Valerius, the king's chief advisor, and the man who ran the citadel with an iron fist. You are missing the spectacle, little bird," he said, his voice a silken threat. He was the one who had nicknamed her Lark, a cruel irony for a girl who never dared to sing. My place is here, my lord," she murmured, not meeting his eyes. His gaze felt like insects crawling on her skin. Indeed, he nudged her bucket with his toe, the dirty water sloshing over the rim. Remember that." He moved on, melting into the throng of courtiers. Larka's jaw tightened. A familiar, useless anger burned in her chest. It was a small, pathetic fire she kept banked deep inside, the only warmth she had ever known. She finished her work, her movements quick and furtive before melting back into the shadows. Along the wall, just another gray stone among many. King Theron entered. The hall fell silent. He was as magnificent and terrible as the mountain itself. Broad-shouldered, with a harsh, beautiful face and eyes the color of a winter sky. He commanded the space without a word, but she could feel it. The hollowness. The chilling lack of presence that was once his signature. He walked to the throne, but did not sit. Standing before his people, his expression unreadable. "There is a weakness in our lands." "A Theron," began his voice, a low rumble that vibrated through the stone floor. "A sickness that touches the heart of the pack." "It touches me." A collective gasp, swiftly suppressed. It was a confession no one had expected. An admission of decay. "Our strength is a fire passed from one generation to the next," he continued, his gaze sweeping over the silent crowd. My fire is failing." "The bond that unites us is fraying." Lark watched, her heart a cold knot of dread. This felt like the end of things. Then Lord Valerius stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the ancient laws are clear. A new bond must be forged. A union to strengthen the bloodline and rekindle the flame." He gestured to a line of noble ladies, all preening and polished their faces, a mixture of ambition and fear. Any of these would be honored to serve the pack. Therona's eyes, pale and distant, passed over them, without interest. It was a dismissal so profound it was a physical blow. The ladies wilted. His gaze continued its slow, inexorable sweep of the hall. It passed over lords and merchants, guards and servants. Lark pressed herself further into the wall, wishing she could disappear entirely. She was nothing, a smudge of dirt on the grandeur of the court. She did not belong in his sightline, but his eyes stopped. They stopped on her. For a heartbeat, the world ceased to exist. There was only the king and her, and the vast, impossible distance between them. Confusion warred with terror in her chest. He couldn't be looking at her. It was a mistake. He took a step. Then another. He moved away from the throne, away from the nobles, away from his advisor. He walked through the sea of parted bodies, his focus a tangible thing, a spear aimed directly at her heart. Larka's breath hitched. Her blood turned to ice. Everyone was turning. Every eye in the hall was on her. The servant girl cowering in the shadows. She wanted to run, to scream, to dissolve into nothing. He stopped a pace away. He was a mountain of a man, and she had never felt so small. The scent of pine and cold stone clung to him, a wild, clean smell that cut through the cloying perfumes of the court. His eyes, up close, were not just pale, they were like fractured ice, holding a deep and ancient weariness. He saw something in her face. She didn't know what it was. Not defiance. Just the quiet, stubborn refusal to be completely extinguished that had kept her alive for 20 years. Without a word, he reached for his left hand and pulled a simple, heavy ring from his finger. It was silver-fashioned to look like a wolf circling to bite its own tail. The seal of the Alpha, the symbol of his very power. He held it out, not to her, but towards her. The silence in the hall was absolute, a crushing weight. What is your name?" His voice was quieter now, meant only for her, yet it echoed in the stillness. "A lark, your majesty," she whispered, her voice trembling. He offered the ring. She stared at it, then at his unyielding face. This was a test, a cruel joke, a mistake. She did not move. She could not. Take it," he commanded, his voice soft but edged with steel. Her hand, chapped and red from the lye water, rose of its own accord. It shook violently. Her fingers brushed his, and a jolt went through her, a shocking, impossible warmth that flared from his skin to hers. It was like touching a hearthstone that had been banked for a century. The deep, residual heat, a ghost of a forgotten fire. She took the ring. It was heavy, humming with a latent power that made her teeth ache. Theron turned back to the stunned hall. His voice rang out, clear and final. The bond is chosen." He walked away, leaving her standing alone in a circle of stunned silence. The king's ring in her trembling hand, and the weight of 1,000 stares on her back. She was taken from the Cervantes quarters, from the thin, lumpy mattress and the perpetual chill, and installed in a suite of rooms near the king's own. They were vast and opulent, with roaring fires in every hearth and furs piled high on the bed. But the warmth felt alien, a luxury she hadn't earned. The silence was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Hours later, he came to her. He dismissed the anxious attendants with a flick of his hand, leaving them alone in the main sitting room. Lark stood by the fire, the silver ring a cold, heavy weight on her finger. It had been sized for him, and she had to wear it on her thumb to keep it from falling off. "You are afraid," he stated. It wasn't a question. She nodded, unable to speak. He moved to the window, looking out at the snow-swept peaks. "I did not do this to frighten you. I did it to save my people, to save myself." "I don't understand," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. Why me?" "I am no one." The words tasted like ash, the familiar litany of her life. "You are not no one," he said, his back still to her. When I looked at the court, I saw 100 fires, all demanding to be fed. When I looked at you, I saw a spark, battered, banked, almost out. But it was pure. It was real." He turned to face her, his expression grim. My own fire is dying, Lark. My wolf grows weaker every day. The ring you wear is not just a symbol. It is a conduit. It needs a source to draw from. I chose yours, a truth of it." Settled on her, cold and clinical. This was not a fairy tale. This was a transaction. She was a battery, a resource to be used. "So this is a duty," she said, her voice flat. The tiny, insane flicker of hope that had ignited in the great hall died. A swift, brutal death. Yes." he said, his gaze hard. It is a duty. There will be no sentiment, no expectations. You will be given every comfort, every respect. You will sit by my side. You will lend me your strength through the conduit of the ring. In return, you will want for nothing. Do you understand? The boundary was drawn, a wall of ice between them, as vast and uncrossable as the glaciers that surrounded the citadel. She was his salvation, but she would never be his queen. Not really. I understand. Your Majesty, she said. The words a betrayal of the strange, warm jolt she had felt when their hands touched. He nodded once. A sharp, decisive movement. A good. He started to leave, but paused at the door. A Valerius will see to your education. He will teach you what you need to know. He looked at her then, and for a fleeting moment the ice in his eyes seemed to crack. Be careful of him. The warning hung in the air long after he was gone. The days that followed were a blur of lessons and fittings. Valerius was her constant shadow, his instructions laced with subtle condescension. He taught her histories, lineages, and protocols, his every word a reminder of how little she knew, how far she was from belonging. The king is a pragmatic man, you see, Valerius said one afternoon, as they walked the castle battlements. The wind sliced like claws, but Lark barely felt it. He requires a solution, and for now, you are it. Do not mistake a tool for a treasure. I do not, Lark said quietly. See that you don't, he smiled, a thin predatory expression. Tools can be replaced. She ate her meals with the king in his private dining chamber. The first few dinners were excruciatingly silent. They sat at opposite ends of a long polished table, the clink of silverware, the only sound. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered. She could feel a faint, constant pull from the ring on her thumb, a quiet hum of energy flowing from her TA somewhere. To him. One evening, she found the courage to speak. Does it help her? She asked, gesturing with her thumb towards the ring. Theron looked up from his plate, surprised. He considered her for a long moment. Yeah, he said, his voice rough. The cold is less severe. The cold, it wasn't just the mountain, it was inside him. She was feeding a fire that was fighting a glacier within his own soul. What does it feel like? She asked, emboldened by his answer. Your wolf. His jaw tightened. It feels like silence, he said, his voice barely audible. Where there was once a storm. In that moment, he wasn't a king. He was just a man, haunted by a profound and terrible loneliness. The wall of ice between them seemed to thin, just a little. She saw the weariness, the desperation beneath the crown. Her own small, banked fire of anger flickered with something else, something dangerously close to sympathy. A week later, he was late for their meal. Lark waited, the food growing cold on the table. An hour passed. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She dismissed the servants and went looking for him, a breach of protocol she didn't care about. She found him in the royal library, a vast, cold room, lined with ancient books. He was slumped in a chair by a dead hearth, his head in his hands. A tremor ran through his massive frame. He was radiating a cold so intense it felt like a physical presence in the room. She approached cautiously. Your Majesty. He did not look up. Leave me. The words were a shattered growl. She ignored the command. Kneeling beside his chair, she reached out, hesitated, and then placed her hand on his arm. His skin was like ice. The shock of it stole her breath. But beneath the chill, she felt the tremor, the deep, agonizing shiver of a body fighting a losing war. And she felt the ring on her thumb surge. A current of warmth, stronger than ever before, flowed from her, down her arm and into him. It was a conscious thing this time, her own small, inner fire answering a desperate need. Theron flinched, then went still. He slowly raised his head, his eyes wide with disbelief. The violent shivering subsided. A faint trace of color returned to his lips. "Ahawa," he whispered. "I don't know," she answered honestly. She kept her hand on his arm, the warmth continuing to flow. It didn't weaken her. If anything, she felt a strange sense of rightness, of purpose. He stared at their joined hands, at her small, chapped fingers resting on the fine wool of his tunic. He looked from her hand to her face, his expression one of raw, unguarded confusion. The king was gone. The Alpha was gone. In his place was Theron, a man drowning in a frozen sea, and she was impossibly a lifeline. He did pull away. He did speak. He just let her stay there, kneeling beside him, her small warmth a defiant spark against his overwhelming cold. The wall between them didn't just thin, it cracked. The incident in the library changed things. The silence between them became less about distance and more about contemplation. He started talking to her during their meals, asking about her life before, about the world as seen from the floor up. He listened with an unnerving intensity, as if her simple observations were state secret. In return, he spoke of his own burden. My father's wolf was a furnace, he told her one night, staring into the fire. Mine was always a winter storm, controlled cold, but it was mine. Now it is just winter. She found herself wanting to ease his pain, a feeling that terrified her. This was supposed to be a transaction, a duty. But watching him fight his own fading spirit, a fierce, protective instinct began to bloom in her chest. Her presence at his side was a source of constant friction within the court. The noble ladies who had been passed over whispered behind their hands. The lords looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. Valerius was the worst. His polite, cutting remarks were a constant reminder of her place. During a formal reception for a visiting delegation, one of the southern lords, flush with wine, made a crude comment about the king as new a hearth Wermera. Before Lark could even process the insult, Theron moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply placed himself between Lark and the Lord, a wall of silent, intimidating fury. "A Lord Marius," Theron said, his voice dangerously soft, "you are addressing the future queen of this kingdom. I suggest you find your apologies, or you can take your concerns to my dungeons." The hall went silent. The Lord paled, stammering an apology before beating a hasty retreat. Theron turned to Lark, his eyes blazing. He was still weak, she knew. But in that moment, the old Alpha was there, a flash of the storm that once was. He had defended her, publicly. He had called her his future queen. The eroding boundary between them had just been shattered. Later that night, he came to her rooms. The energy of the confrontation still clung to him. "I apologize for that," he said, his voice strained. No one has the right to speak to you that way." You called me your queen," she said, her heart hammering against her ribs. He looked away, running a hand through his dark hair. Was a necessary statement to protect the sanctity of the bond. The wall went back up, hastily rebuilt. But she had seen the other side. She knew it wasn't just about the bond anymore. She could feel it in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, in the way he now sought her company, not just for meals, but for quiet moments in the library or walks on the sheltered battlements. Is that all it was?" she pressed, finding a boldness she did know she possessed. Statement. He turned back to her, and his control finally broke. The weariness and the loneliness were stark on his face. No," he admitted, the word torn from him. It was not." He took a step towards her, then another, until he was standing so close she could feel the faint warmth he now carried, a warmth she knew came from her. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray strand of hair. His touch was hesitant, almost reverent. This was supposed to be simple," he whispered, more to himself than to her. A matter of survival." It is not simple," she whispered back, her own fear and longing a tangled knot in her throat. A no, he agreed, his eyes searching hers. A no, it is not. He leaned in, and for a dizzying pulse, terrifying moment, she thought he was going to kiss her, but he stopped, his forehead resting against hers, his eyes closed. He just breathed, a long, shaky sigh. It was a gesture of profound exhaustion and even greater trust. He was letting her see the cracks in his armor, the man falling apart inside the king, and Lark, the servant girl, the nobody, found herself wanting nothing more than to hold him together. The next morning, Valerius requested a private audience with her. His mask of civility was gone. His eyes were cold, hard chips of obsidian. He led her to a small, isolated study, the walls lined with scrolls and maps. You are becoming a problem," he began, dispensing with any pretense. "I am doing what the king commanded," Alark replied, her voice steady, despite the fear coiling in her gut. You are doing more than that," Valerius sneered. You are giving him hope. And hope is a poison this kingdom cannot afford." He unrolled a scroll on the table. It was a complex genealogical chart, lines of power and magic traced in blood-red ink. He pointed to Therna's name. The King's line is powerful, but it carries a flaw. When their wolf fades, it is a sign that the fire is consuming the vessel. It is a slow self-destruction. The histories are clear. He then unrolled another scroll, this one filled with arcane symbols. She didn't recognize these are readings of his energy, taken over the last month. "Since your arrival," he tapped a descending line, his core energy fading faster than ever. He then tapped another, smaller line that was spiking erratically. This is the surface warmth you provide. A false summer. You are not healing him, girl. You are masking the symptoms. You are making him feel strong, while the rot spreads faster beneath. You are accelerating his death." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at the charts, at the damning, scientific-looking proof. Her self-doubt, the companion of her entire life, rose up like a tidal wave. Of course, how could she, a nobody, possibly save a king? He was a dying star. All she was doing was burning him out faster. He feels better, she argued weakly, clinging to the memory of the warmth returning to his skin. He feels the fire you are feeding him, Valerius said, his voice dropping to a sympathetic poisonous whisper, but his body cannot contain it. It is burning through his reserves, hollowing him out. Every moment of strength you give him costs him a week of his life. He leaned in closer. I have served this kingdom my entire life. I served his father. I will not stand by and watch a foolish, sentimental girl kill our king, because it makes her feel important. His logic was cruel and perfect. It preyed on her deepest fear, that she was worthless, and that her attempts to be more would only cause destruction. What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice hollow. The ring is the conduit," he said. It focuses your energy into him. Without it, you are just a girl, and he is just a king facing his fate. The bond will be broken. He will be forced to accept his decline, and the council can begin making arrangements for a peaceful succession. For the good of the kingdom. His eyes bored into hers. If you care for him at all, you will give it back. You will set him free from this false hope you represent. He wanted her to leave, to abandon Theron to his fate. To save him by destroying him, he will never agree, she said, thinking of the look in Theron's eyes the night before. Then you must make him, Valerius said smoothly. You must show him that the bond is a mistake, that you reject it, do it publicly, humiliate him, make it impossible for him to refuse. It will be a kindness, I assure you. A sharp, clean break is better than a slow, agonizing death. He left her there with the scrolls, the evidence of her own catastrophic failure, the warmth she had felt, the sense of purpose, all of it curdled into guilt and horror. She wasn't his lifeline, she was his end. The weight of the ring on her thumb felt like a brand. Valerius's words echoed in her mind for the next 2 days, poisoning every interaction with Theron. When he smiled at her, she saw the life she was supposedly burning away. When he touched her hand, she felt the leaching of his future. Her self-doubt became a suffocating fog. She was a servant girl, playing queen. Valerius was a lord, a scholar. He knew the histories, the magic. Who was she to question him? Her love, and she couldn't deny it was love anymore, was a selfish, destructive thing. To truly love him, she had to let him go. She had to save him from herself. The next formal court assembly was her chance, her stage. Her heart felt like a block of ice in her chest. This would be the hardest thing she had ever done. It would destroy her, and it would break his heart. But in her terrified, manipulated mind, it was the only way to save his life. She waited until the hall was full, until Theron was seated on his throne, Valerius standing at his right hand, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Theron caught her eye and gave her a small, private smile. It was a dagger in her heart. She walked to the center of the floor, her steps heavy, her gray dress feeling once more like the Cervantes rags she had worn her whole life. She turned to face him, the king who had seen a spark in her and tried to fan it into a flame. She was about to extinguish it herself. Your Majesty, she began, her voice shaking, but carrying through the suddenly silent hall. He frowned, a flicker of concern in his eyes. A lark? What is it? She took a deep breath, the air burning her lungs. I have come to a realization. Lord Valerius was right. A tool should not be mistaken for a treasure. A murmur rippled through the court. Theron's expression hardened. He knew where this was going. A lark, do not do this. But she had to. She pulled the heavy silver ring from her thumb. The moment it left her skin, a profound coldness washed over her, a sense of loss, so absolute it was a physical agony. She saw him flinch on the throne, his hand going to his chest as if from a sudden blow. The warmth was gone. The connection was severed. Reject this bond, she said, her voice breaking on the last word. She held the ring out, her hand trembling so hard she could barely keep it open. It was a mistake. I cannot be what you need. She looked at him, pleading with her eyes for him to understand the sacrifice she was making. But all she saw was a flash of utter betrayal, followed by a wave of pain that contorted his features. The color drained from his face. The faint heat he had gathered over the past weeks vanished, replaced by a ghastly, chilling pallor. I gave the Alpha King back his ring in front of everyone, she thought, the words a frantic, desperate prayer. Please understand. Please live. He rose from the throne, his movements stiff, unsteady. The entire court could see it now. The weakness he had been hiding, the fragility she had been masking. He was vulnerable. Exposed. Take it, as she choked out, thrusting the ring towards him. He did not take the ring. He took her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, a desperate, anchoring hold. His skin was already turning ice-cold again. You are wrong, he growled, his voice low and guttural with pain and fury. This is Valerius. He has been poisoning your mind. The proof, she started to say, her resolve crumbling at his touch. The proof is a lie, he snarled, turning a look of pure murder on his advisor. Valerius took an involuntary step back, his composure finally cracking. Theron's gaze returned to her, his eyes blazing with a desperate light. My wolf is not dying because you are burning me out. It is dying because it has been alone for a century. You are the first warmth it has felt. You are not the sickness lark. You are the cure. He is trying to take you from me because a cure would make me strong again. And a strong king has no need for a manipulative advisor. The world tilted on its axis. Valeria says, perfect, cruel logic shattered, replaced by Theron's raw, desperate truth. He needed her. He wasn't dying because of her. He was living because of her. And she had just driven the knife in herself. Oh, God, she whispered. The horror of what she'd done crashing down. What have I done? It is not too late, a Theron said, his voice strained. He was weakening by the second, the effort of his anger and his stand costing him dearly. He swayed on his feet, the cold overwhelming him. Valerius saw his chance. The girl has confessed. She is a drain, a parasite. Seize her, he commanded the royal guards. For the good of the kingdom. The king is not in his right mind. The guards hesitated, torn between their king and his powerful advisor. But Valerius had commanded them for years. Two of them started forward, their hands on the hilts of their swords. Theron pushed her behind him, shielding her with his body, but it was a futile gesture. He was shaking, his breath misting in the air. He was freezing from the inside out. He was dying, right here, in front of everyone. "Oh no," Lark whispered. The sound was lost in the chaos. The guards reached them. One of them put a hand on her arm. And the tiny, banked fire inside her, the one she had nurtured in the cold for 20 years, the one that had been soothed and strengthened by Theranaw's belief in her, it didn't just flicker. It roared. A wave of heat erupted from her body. It was not a gentle warmth. It was a furnace blast, a wave of pure incandescent power. The guard who touched her cried out, snatching his hand back as if burned. The air around her shimmered. The cold in the hall instantly vanquished. She stepped out from behind Theron, her eyes fixed on Valerius. She wasn't a servant. She wasn't a tool. She was a fire. You will not touch him," she said, and her voice was not her own. It was layered, resonant, filled with the crackle of flame, and an authority that dwarfed everyone in the room. Valerius stared, his face a mask of shock and fear. He had seen a spark and mistaken it for a candle flame. He had never imagined it was the heart of a sun. "A witcha," he breathed. She raised a hand. A ball of white-hot light formed in her palm, pulsing with power. "You tried to use my love for him as a weapon against him," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "You tried to extinguish the only light in his world to preserve your own shadow." The power surging through her was terrifying and exhilarating. It was life. It was rage. It was a love so fierce it could burn the world down to protect its source. Her survival instinct, her protective fury, had unlocked the floodgates of a magic she never knew she possessed. She took a step towards Valerius and he scrambled backwards, falling over his own feet. The lords and ladies of the court cowered away from her, their faces filled with awe and terror. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Theron. He was leaning on her, but the heat radiating from her was already seeping into him, fighting back the chill, steadying him. "Alark," he breathed. Her name, his voice filled with wonder. Enough. The rage receded, leaving a fierce, burning strength in its place. She let the light in her hand dissipate, but the power still hummed beneath her skin. She turned to Theron, her king, the man she had almost destroyed. The pain and betrayal were gone from his eyes, replaced by a love so profound it made her knees weak. He took the ring from her still open palm. His fingers, no longer cold, closed around hers. You were saying it was a mistake," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire hall to hear. He looked from her to the stunned faces of his court. She was right. It was a mistake to do this in private, in the shadows. A bond this strong should be forged in the light, before all our people. He pulled her towards the great doors of the hall, which opened onto the central courtyard of the citadel. "Ring the bells," he commanded. "Summon the pack. Every man, woman, and child. They will bear witness." He led her out into the snow-filled courtyard. The bells began to toll, a deep, resonant sound that echoed off the mountains. People began pouring from the workshops, the barracks, the kitchens, their faces confused, drawn by the urgent summons. Within minutes the courtyard was packed. 1,000 faces turned up towards them on the steps of the great hall. The entire court had followed them out, forming a semicircle behind them. Valerius was being held by 2 loyal guards, his face ashen. Theron turned to her, ignoring the gathering throng. He held the silver ring between his thumb and forefinger. The heat from her body was flowing into him, and she could feel the faint, stirring echo of his wolf, a sleepy beast waking from a long, cold hibernation. "I love you," he said, his voice raw with emotion, stripped of all its royal artifice. "I think I have from the moment I saw you, standing in the shadows, refusing to be broken. I was a fool to try and build a wall against it." Against you, tears streamed down her face, freezing on her cheeks. "I love you," she whispered back. So sorry. There is nothing to forgive," he said, his voice softening. He lifted her left hand. It was no longer red and chapped, but smooth, the inner fire having healed it from within. He slid the ring, not onto her thumb, but onto the fourth finger of her left hand. It magically resized itself, shrinking to a perfect snug fit. A pulse of energy, gold and white, erupted from the point of contact, washing over the entire courtyard. Every wolf in the pack felt it at the ceiling of the bond, the return of their alpha's fire, stronger and brighter than ever before. He put it back on her finger in front of more. He leaned down and kissed her, acclaiming, a promise, a prayer of thanks in front of his entire kingdom. The crowd, silent in its shock, erupted into a deafening roar of approval. They had seen their king fading. Now they saw him burning bright, and they saw the source of the flame. He broke the kiss and rested his forehead against hers, his eyes glowing with a faint golden light. My queen," he murmured, for her alone to hear. She looked at her hand, at the silver wolf on her finger, and then at the sea of faces before her. She was no longer a servant, no longer a ghost. She was a fire. She was a queen. She was home. 3 months passed. The winter broke, and a vibrant, tenacious spring began to climb the slopes of the mountain. The citadel, once a place of cold stone and whispered fears, now felt alive. Laughter could be heard in the corridors. The fires in the hearths burned brighter. Lark stood on the balcony of their chambers, the morning sun warm on her face. A heavy fur was draped over her shoulders, but it was Therina's arm around her waist that truly kept her warm. The snows are melting on the southern pass," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. The trade caravans will be able to get through by the end of the week." Leaning back against his solid chest, "We need the grain." It was strange, thinking in terms of Awa and Anita on the scale of a kingdom, but it was becoming as natural as breathing. His wolf was no longer silent. It was a constant, warm presence in the back of his mind, a storm rebuilding its strength, a furnace rekindling its heat. Her fire had not been a temporary patch. It had been the missing piece, the catalyst that allowed his own power to begin healing itself. They were two halves of a whole, his ice and her fire-finding. A perfect, powerful balance. What are you thinking about?" he asked, his lips brushing her temple. "Valerius," she admitted. The advisor had not been executed. At her request, Theron had shown mercy. He was exiled to a remote monastery, stripped of his titles and influence, left to contemplate his histories and the miscalculations he had made. He had believed he was acting for the good of the kingdom, a mirror to their own devotion, but his vision had been clouded by pride and a fear of the unknown. He was wrong about everything," Theron said, his grip tightening protectively. But he was right about one thing." Lark turned in his arms to look at him. What?" A slow smile spread across his face, a rare and beautiful sight, like the sun breaking through after a month of rain. "You are a treasure." "My treasure?" She rolled her eyes, but a genuine laugh escaped her, a sound she had never known she possessed until him. The terrible line. It's the truest thing I know," he insisted, his expression turning serious. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. You saved me, Lark. Not just my life, my soul. We saved each other." she corrected him softly, placing her hands over his. The silver ring on her finger was warm against his skin. That is how a bond is supposed to work. He kissed her then, a deep, lingering kiss filled with the quiet comfort of a shared morning and the fierce passion that still burned between them. The future was not without its challenges. There were other kingdoms, other politics, the endless duties of the crown. But for the first time in her life, Lark was not afraid. She was no longer a spark, cowering in the cold. She was the heart of the fire, and she was right where she belonged.